Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is U.S. pressure on Israel. Pressure from the White House and pressure from pundits. Modern-day prophets are preaching the end of the special relationship between the United States and Israel. They are false prophets. They are wrong. They are looking to make headlines, and at that, they are succeeding. But they are misreading the situation from A to Z. There is no question that the Biden administration is disappointed with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Washington has made its feelings publicly known. The White House does not like the new Israeli cabinet, composed as it is of a coalition that includes vocal and very pushy right-of-center parties. Biden has called the Israeli coalition, quote, the most extreme, unquote, and, quote, the most right-wing, unquote, in memory, actually in his memory. Biden's observations happen to be correct, but that right-wing government was duly, fairly, and squarely elected. The results were not challenged by Israelis. The only complaints the losers had is they could muster up is that they were extremely disappointed with the resulting government. Not that it didn't deserve to be in power, they were duly elected. Governments in Israel rise and fall all the time, given that Israel is a parliamentary democracy with a 120-member parliament, or Knesset, as the Israeli parliament is called. A vote of no confidence, gaining 61 or more votes, topples the government that sends Israel back to new elections. And since its formation 6 months ago, that has not happened. One of the most recent great prognosticators of doom and gloom for Israel and the United States is the New York Times' Thomas Friedman. According to the invective he spewed in his column in the New York Times, U.S. President Joe Biden will reassess the relationship between the United States and Israel before the 2024 election. According to Friedman, the time has come for Biden to show Israel some tough love. Friedman writes, but I have no doubt that the U.S. president will arm the Israeli president with a message, out of sorrow, not anger, that when the interests and values of U.S. government and an Israeli government diverge this much, a reassessment of the relationship is inevitable. I'm not talking about the reassessment of our military and intelligence cooperation with Israel, which remains strong and vital. I am talking about our basic diplomatic approach to an Israel that is unabashedly locking in a one-state solution, a Jewish state only, with the fate and rights of the Palestinians TBD, to be determined. Such a reassessment based on U.S. interests and values would be some tough love for Israel, but a real necessity before it truly does go off the rails. That Biden is prepared to get in Netanyahu's face before America's 2024 election suggests that our president believes that he has the support not only of most Americans for this, but most American Jews, and even most Israeli Jews. He's right on all three counts. Well written, but not as well thought out or as accurate. It might be a good idea for U.S. political leadership and pundits like Tom Friedman to remember recent history and to watch Israel carefully before attempting to publicly meddle in the internal affairs of the Jewish state. They should offer their critique to Israel behind closed doors. But they don't. Why not? It's called good old U.S. arrogance. The United States sincerely believes that it can bully and embarrass Israeli leadership to change direction. For some absurd reason, the United States believes that if the decisions taken by Netanyahu and his government are not decisions approved by the United States will be weakened internationally. That enemies will extrapolate and conclude that the power and influence of the United States is weakened in the region. If the administration was really watching what was happening in Israel, not just peering in through their narrow lenses, they would recognize that there is significant internal pressure being brought against the government from within Israel. From within Israel, without outside pressure or involvement of the United States or pundits like Tom Friedman. and that the internal pressure, the legal, democratic, organized protest movements that are sweeping the country have been very successful. Regular daily mass protests are having a serious impact on Netanyahu. And indeed, because of the protests, the original judicial reform package, the impetus for Biden's claims of extremism, has changed dramatically. The package now takes into account the concerns of the opposition. And if they paid closer attention and did their research, U.S. naysayers and prophets of doom would understand that because of the way Israel's democracy works, those very compromises may actually be the catalyst that causes right-wing elements in the Netanyahu government to bolt from the coalition. And if that should happen, the result will be the toppling of the Netanyahu government, sending Israel back to the ballot box. If that does happen, it will not, repeat, not be because of Joe Biden in his Washington White House, or because of Tom Friedman in his New York Times ivory tower and the columns that he writes. It will be the result of a successful democratic process in a stable democratic country called Israel. There have been many periods where the U.S. administrations and Israel did not get along, and yet their special relationship continued. Who can forget the obscenities blurted out in 1992 by James Baker in the Oval Office to then President George H.W. Bush? He said, "F the Jews, they don't vote for us anyway." And the relationship did not come to an end. Bush 41 and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir did not get along. Bill Clinton, who followed Bush 41, despised Bibi Netanyahu, finding him haughty and arrogant. Obama, too, had serious issues with him, and the relationships did not come to an end. Israel and the United States disagree about significant issues, and they have in the past, and they will in the future. The big difference between then and now is that the previous U.S. leaders were mature enough to handle the differences. Friends are allowed to disagree. Sometimes those disagreements make the relationship even stronger. Coming up next, points of view. First up is a column from the Jewish Press. The column was written by Paul Gerken and was published on June 16, 2023. It's entitled, "Majority of Palestinians Believe Israel Will Soon Cease to Exist." Gerken presents his readers with the latest Palestinian polls on Palestinian attitudes towards Israel. I must say that I follow this very carefully, and the numbers, as you will see, are stunning. Gerken begins his column this way. The latest Palestinian poll of June 14, 2023 showed a familiar preference for violence that has been a constant sentiment for years. Now a new headline has emerged. Palestinians think Israel will disappear within the next 25 years. When asked about the most positive things to happen to Palestinians over the last 75 years since the reestablishment of the Jewish state in Israel, in the so-called Nakba catastrophe, number one response was the establishment of the terrorist groups Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Second were the two Intifada pogroms, which killed over 1,000 Israeli Jews. Trailing those responses was the creation of the PLO and the Palestinian Authority, the PA. And last, the formation of the more moderate political party Fatah. As optimistic as I try to be, and I am hopeful as I try to be, that peace between Israel and the Palestinians will come soon, these polls do not bode well for the relationship between Palestinians and Israel. Gerken continues, a large majority of 71% are in favor of the formation of the newest terrorist groups, Lion's Den and Jenin Battalion, which sparked the rise in deaths among both Israelis and Palestinians over the past 2 years. An incredible 86% of the Palestinian Arabs think the terrorist groups should operate outside the PA. Not surprisingly, with such support, 58% expect these armed groups to expand and spread to other areas in the West Bank. When asked about the most effective means of creating a Palestinian state, the public split into three groups. 52% chose armed struggle, aka violent jihad, 55 in the Gaza Strip and 49 in the West Bank, 21% negotiations, and 22% popular resistance. Gerken concludes his column with the most depressing finding in the polls. Palestinians actually believe that Israel will disappear. In his words, in the latest poll, people were asked a more general question about the future of Israel as the country celebrated its 75th anniversary. In response to the question of Israel making it to its 100th anniversary, 2/3 say Israel will not celebrate the centenary of its establishment. And the majority believes that the Palestinian people will be able in the future to recover Palestine and return its refugees to their homes. While the world debates how to set the peace process on track and solely blames the Israeli government for the failure of progress, Palestinians have mentally moved on and see the end of the Jewish state in their lifetimes and its replacement with an Arab country. Wow. I ask you, where do they think Israel will go? They think that they will destroy Israel? It's too difficult to comprehend how distant the masses of Palestinians are from reality. So distant and so scary. Next up is a column by Tom Friedman. I referred to it earlier. I referenced it during the background briefing. This piece was published in the New York Times on July 11th, 2023. It's worth delving into some more detail on the question. Friedman's piece is entitled, "The U.S. Reassessment of Netanyahu's Government Has Begun." As I pointed out, Friedman and the New York Times have been on a campaign to interfere in internal Israeli issues. Again, while one might disagree with what is happening in Israel, it is indisputably the democracy of Israel at work. Historically, as will be the case this time also, there will be new Israeli elections and the pendulum will swing and shift back. That's just the way it is. Friedman disagrees. Listen to what Tom Friedman is espousing. Whenever people ask me what I do for a living, I tell them I'm a translator from English to English. I try to take complex subjects and make them understandable, first to myself and then to readers. And that is what I want to do here regarding three interrelated questions. Why is Israel's cabinet trying to crush the country's Supreme Court? Why did President Biden tell CNN that this is one of the most extreme Israeli cabinets he'd ever seen? And why did the U.S. ambassador to Israel just say that America is working to prevent Israel from going off the rails? The short answer to all three questions is that the Biden team sees the far-right Israeli government, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, engaged in unprecedented radical behavior under the cloak of judicial reform, of course. That is undermining our shared interest with Israel, our shared values, and the important shared fiction about the status of the West Bank that has kept peace hopes there just barely alive. If you want to get just a whiff of the tension between the United States and this Israeli cabinet, spearheaded by extremists, consider that hours after Biden mentioned CNN's Fareed Zakaria just how extreme some of Netanyahu's cabinet members were, one of the most extreme of them all, the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, told Biden to butt out, that Israel is no longer another star in the American flag. Nice, eh? According to a 2020 Congressional Research Service report, Israel has received the most U.S. foreign assistance of any country in the world since World War II, at $146 billion, not adjusted for inflation. That's quite an allowance, and one that might have merited a little more respect for the United States President from Ben-Gvir, who in his youth was convicted of inciting racism against Arabs. There is a sense of shock today among U.S. diplomats who've been dealing with Netanyahu, Israel's longest-serving prime minister, and a man of considerable smarts and political talent. They just find it hard to believe that Bibi would allow himself to be led around by the nose by people like Ben-Gvir, would be ready to risk Israel's relations with America and with global investors, and would be ready to risk a civil war in Israel just to stay in power with a group of ciphers and ultra-nationalists. I'm pausing here because I need to make it perfectly clear that Israel is not on the brink of a civil war. Did you hear that? Israel is not on the brink of a civil war. Internal tensions are high, but for Israel, that is not unusual. Friedman continues his column with a discussion of moderate Israel, the side he agrees with. He writes, "Why should the U.S. continue to defend the idea in the United Nations and the International Court that Israel is just temporarily occupying the West Bank and therefore is not practicing some form of apartheid there, when this Israeli government appears to be openly hell-bent on annexing the West Bank and has given two of the most active annexationists, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, extensive security and financial powers over settlements in that region?" Israel's very decent, moderate president, Isaac Herzog, who has been pleading with Netanyahu's coalition to step back from forcing any changes in the judiciary and to do so only by national consensus, will be meeting with Biden in Washington next week. It is Biden's way of signaling that his problem is not with the Israeli people, but with Bibi's extremist cabinet. Friedman's column concludes with the lines I quoted earlier, prophesying that President Biden should and will discipline Israel, especially Prime Minister Netanyahu. He writes, "I'm not talking about a reassessment of our military and intelligence cooperation with Israel, which remains strong and vital. I'm talking about our basic diplomatic approach to an Israel that is unabashedly locking in a one-state solution, a Jewish state only, with the fate and rights of the Palestinians to be determined. Such a reassessment based on U.S. interests and values would be some tough love for Israel, but a real necessity before it truly does go off the rails. That Biden is prepared to get in Netanyahu's face before America's 2024 election suggests that our president believes that he has the support not only of most Americans for this, but most American Jews and even most Israeli Jews. He is right on all three counts. This entire approach is arrogant and patronizing. What's worse is that it will not achieve the desired ends that either Tom Friedman or Joe Biden desire. Having said all that, it's always important to know how those you don't agree with are thinking. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 8 cartoons, headlines, and memes today. This first is a hilarious commentary on truth in the media, especially social media. When you look at this first frame, it looks like a man is looking out the window of an airplane. When you look at the second frame, you see he's actually looking through a toilet seat. The caption reads, "Don't believe everything you see on social media." Next up is a sign from a diner. It reads, "Happy 3rd birthday to the jar of pickles sitting in my fridge." I'm certain that speaks to many people who have something like a jar of pickles sitting for 3 years or more in their fridge. This next meme is perfect for those who don't realize that autocorrect has incorrectly corrected their material. The meme reads, "Have you been victimized by autocorrect? If so, you may be entitled compensation. Only they misspelled compensation intentionally. This time compensation has 2 dollar signs for S's." This is so funny. The first time I saw it, I truly laughed out loud. I know that people have problems with apostrophes. It's a common issue. But this is truly absurd. The caption reads, "The 4 apostrophes of the apocalypses." Next up is a headline from a science journal that should have known better, especially because they're good in math. The headline reads, "Air pollution, 38,000 deaths per year worldwide, including 48,000 in France. Impossible mathematically. Very poor editing. A 0 must have been added somewhere." This next piece is about Bud Light. Its headline, "Bud Light is the gift that ultimately does not stop giving when it comes to humor." This headline actually reads, "Bud Light plummets to 14th place amongst beer As Anheuser-Busch CEO pleads for customers to think of the 65,000 employees impacted by the boycott. Bud Light was number one. Now it's 14th. Wow. This next meme is very funny. Who would think of this? A car is broken into. We see the broken window. The meme reads, "Awful day today. I had 2 volumes of the collective work of Hegel in my car. Someone broke in and left 2 more. That's funny." This next meme is an attempt to make people feel better. North Korean dictator and despot Kim Jong-un is sitting and staring and watching someone next to him who is sitting in front of a keyboard and screen, presumably awaiting some important response. The meme reads, "In case you think you're working under pressure." Can you imagine that? The dictator is sitting right next to you. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen visited Nairobi at the invitation of Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta and Kenyan Foreign Minister Monica Juma. This visit was set against the backdrop of a semi-annual meeting of the African Union. It was a good meeting. During the brief visit, Cohen met with his host and other African leaders. Kenya is one of the leading countries supporting Israel's and implementing the Jewish state's observer status in the African Union. 4 additional energy companies have put forth bids in response to Israel's latest tender for offshore exploration blocks. The Energy Ministry reports that bids have come from a total of 9 companies, 5 of which are new to the Israeli market. The ministry did not, however, name the companies that took part in the tender for exploration blocks off Israel's Mediterranean coast. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said Israel has foiled about 50 Iranian attacks in recent years, some at the very last moment. Gallant made this announcement while on an official visit to Azerbaijan. He told reporters that Tehran had not abandoned its objectives of entrenchment in Syria and emphasized that Iran's activity is in full swing, not only in the region, but also around the world. There continues to be a massive heat wave in Israel. The Noga company, the company that's responsible for managing the electric grid in Israel, said that due to the extreme weather, electricity consumption throughout the country is abnormal and causes loads on the system. Wanting to avoid mass panic or alarm, the company further reported that as part of our assessments, we do not foresee any difficulty in supplying the entire amount of the public's expected consumption in the coming days. We ask the citizens of Israel to refrain from operating non-essential energy guzzling electrical appliances such as washing machines and clothes dryers and dishwashers between the hours of 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. That will enable, by the way, the country to use its air conditioners during the hottest time of the day. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky criticized Israel during a meeting with NATO leaders in Vilnius, Lithuania, for failing to support his country in its war against Russia. The Ukrainian leader accused Israel of refusing to provide air defense systems and weapons to his country, and of strengthening ties with Moscow instead. Zelensky also stated that Netanyahu has been invited to Ukraine several times, but refuses to come. 2 Jerusalem residents were arrested on suspicion of having vandalized the Polish church on Hachoma Hashlishit Street in Jerusalem. According to police, that is. The 2 men, aged 18 and 24, were taken in for questioning after reports of vandalism were received over the weekend, and the police opened an investigation. A total of 4 suspects were arrested, but only 2 are being brought to court. According to a statement released by the Israeli police, they said, "We take damage to religious institutions and sites very seriously. The police will continue to act against acts of violence and vandalism in holy places pertaining to all religions. We will also continue to work to maintain security and order and to fight resolutely and uncompromisingly against criminals wherever they may be and those who harm holy places." We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. We've been focusing on the issue of the special relationship, the nature of the special relationship between Israel and the United States. It's an important idea, and one that we've not just spoken about here, but we've spoken about in the past. In Hebrew, there are many words for friend. By now, almost the whole world knows that chaver means friend, because that's what Bill Clinton said at Rabin's funeral, Shalom chaver.
Because words cannot express my true feelings, let me just say, Shalom chaver. Goodbye, friend.
Other lesser-known Hebrew words for friends are Yedid, Shachen, Reyecha, Yakir, Ahuv, and Ach. The words are important. We have many words for friends in English also. Companion is a perfect example. It comes from the Latin and then into the French. Com means with and pan means bread. A companion is someone with whom you break bread. In Judaism, when three people sit together at a meal, it would be considered a lost opportunity to simply eat and drink and not learn and study Torah together. It is for that reason that when three people sit together at a meal, they conclude their meal reciting the Birkat HaMazon, the grace after meals out loud, with a call and response. That call and response is a symbolic moment of learning. In Judaism, every moment is a teaching moment and a learning moment. There's no such thing as a lost educational opportunity. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.